This is a conversation between non-German English language writers, myself, Vijay Khurana and Rajeev Balasubramanyam, and German writer Deniz Utlu, who writes in German. All of us live and write in Berlin, so this is not a representation of the Berlin writer scene or the Berlin international writer scene, which is impossible to represent, both of them anyway, but a braiding together of several literary and friendship connections that I have made via literary artistic community, which has evolved into writing and friendship, togetherness, writing groups, PhD conversations, to consider what it is to be a writer in the city now. So, welcome, and thank you so much for making the time for Wasafiri and for me to join along. I've asked you to bring along copies of your books, so if you don't mind, would you please introduce yourself to Wasafiri and Wasafiri's international community of readers and writers and thinkers, and tell us about your books. Maybe we could start with Deniz.
My name is Deniz Utlu. I'm a novelist and essayist, and I write plays as well and poetry, but the main domain, I would say, are the novels. The last one is Vaters Meer, My Father's Sea. That was published in 2023, yes, already 2 years, incredible. I was touring with this book till recently, actually. The first one was the Ungehaltenen. I think it's a term very difficult to translate into English, actually impossible. Maybe you come up with an idea and you're a translator.
That's tricky.
They tried the indigent, but it's only one layer of the word, because the Ungehalten means being angry. I published it in 2014, my first novel, and it's about a person with Turkish or Turkey heritage in Berlin being very angry while losing his father, angry towards the society, towards himself. So this is ungehalten, angry, but it's also it means also disconnected, not held. And so the word, the ungehalten, has both. I don't know how to translate it into English, the title. And the second one was Gegen Morgen, towards morning. The first two ones are actually set in Berlin, so they are really, Berlin is a character itself in the novels. The last one is not Berlin based. And I'm working mainly on, like, my topics are, I would say, memory, language itself, multilinguality, like living with different languages and in translation. It's a topic in all of the books, and all three books try to find a way to express this in literature. Maybe we talk more about those things later. And my essays are sometimes poetological, where I think about how do we write today, how do I write, is that the right way to respond to a world collapsing? And sometimes it's more political, about racism, migration, racist attacks, for instance, in Germany. Now I just finished an essay on diasporas in Sweden, including the aesthetics of resistance by Peter Weiss, who lived in Sweden.
Yeah.
So far.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. And we will discuss all these themes and topics in the questions going forward. So I would like Rajeev now to say, full disclosure, Rajeev is my husband. So thank you for joining, Rajeev. I know it was hard to convince you.
So this is my first. My name is Rajeev Balasubramanyam. I write fiction primarily, also essays and journalism. but I'm working on my first non-fiction book. This is my first book, published in 2000, before Deniz was born, and that was set in India. I can't remember very much about it. It was a very long time. This is my second novel. I decided I had to write something about my traumatic experiences in Britain, so this took 10 years, and I descended into sort of a hellhole in my own mind, and eventually this came out, The Dreamer. I liked it. I'm not sure how many other people did. But it started to go inside the mind, which was the direction I was going to continue in. And then I sort of switched the trajectory of my life and went from being a kind of morning drinker with dark themes to doing a lot of meditation and being a substance-free person. And then I went from there to meditating for 4 hours a day and using a lot of psychedelics, and having a lot of therapy and spirituality became my focus. So then this came after I got this fellowship for writers with a meditation practice, or writers with a spiritual practice, where they financed me to wander across America meditating for 6 months, which was good. Because a lot of these retreats, being America, are quite expensive. And so then this came, Professor Chandra Follows His Bliss, which was my last novel, which finally, the purpose of the fellowship was to combine your literary practice with your spiritual practice, and this actually did it. I didn't know if it was possible, because it felt like my work was going to get even darker still when you start to go into your own trauma, but then eventually you figure a way out, a kind of lightness, and a lightness and humor once you're no longer so trapped by your own ego. That was really what it was about. So we had this, which is in some other languages somewhere here, and then now I am working on a non-fiction book about all of these things called okay, maybe leave the title, but it's it's about the mess that we're in as a species and how do we get out of it. And my suggestion is that we created it because of the faulty nature of our minds. So by cleaning up our minds and starting again, getting rid of all of this messed up culture and identity and fundamentalisms and the lack of capacity to speak to one another without getting very angry. If we can just start again and look at ourselves and our egos, then maybe we can avert the almost certain apocalypse which seems to be heading our way. So that's what my new book is about, and I'm in progress with that.
Thank you. Now, please, let's move on to Vijay.
I'm Vijay Khurana. I am a fiction writer and a translator. My first novel came out earlier this year. That's this one, The Passenger Seat, which is sort of about masculinity, the connections between male friendship and violence. And I'm currently working on a second novel, which is actually set partly in Berlin and has kind of themes that maybe resonate with some of the things we might talk about today in terms of kind of immigrant experience, but also it's very heavily about the disembodied voice and what it means to listen, what it means to communicate across national boundaries as well. And in addition to my own fiction, I translate from German into English. And the thing I'm working on right now is this excellent novel by a German writer called Senturan Varataraja, called in German Rot Hunger, but it will be, I think, a direct translation, an easier translation perhaps than yours, Deniz. It'll be called Red Hunger, and it'll be out with Tilted Access Press, I think in 2026.
How beautiful to have you all introduce yourselves rather than me giving a dry biography that I've pulled from the internet. So I'm really happy about that. Thank you. I wanted people to get to know you and your work. So I want to start with a couple of questions about your relationship to Berlin. And so I want to know what first brought you to this city, and how has your relationship changed to Berlin from when you first encountered it to now? Maybe we can shift things up and maybe start with you, Vijay.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love to say that I just happened to end up in Berlin, which is, I think, what a lot of people who have come to this city tend to say. And of course, it's sort of true and not true at the same time. But I always, from a relatively young age, learnt German. I learnt German in high school. In my Australian high school, they offered German, which was incredible. I studied at university. So in 2011, I had been living in Australia working in radio, and I knew I wanted to make some changes in my life, not only perhaps living in a different place, but also focusing more on writing. And after living in Cambodia for about a year, I sort of realized that I had a British passport through family, and at the time, obviously, that meant that I could live in the European Union, and I spoke German, so it was kind of a perfect place to come. So I've lived here for 13 years now, give or take a few years elsewhere for study and things like this. But I guess I'm getting to the point where I have seen the city change quite a lot. I think my relationship to the city has really, it's inextricably linked to my own aging and growth and change as a person. So I find it kind of an interesting and kind of hard question to answer, because, you know, I'm not the kind of person who is looking to go to, I don't know, clubs or even at this point bars very much. And really what the city means for me as a writer is some really simple stuff about having friends here who I can talk to about writing and who I find interesting and who I find inspiring and energizing, having, you know, a safe and stable home, having, a bit of a community, but also just having, you know, that very simple, boring line from your home to the library or wherever you do your work, and then to go get some food and then to go back home again. And when that triangle is kind of working okay and you have some friends, I think that, you know, many places in the world are good places to be a creative person. So, yeah, that's my relationship to Berlin.
Thank you. Who wants to go next?
What was I just happened to end up. I was here in a young writer project when I was a young writer, which was right after that. And on this project, they sent you to various literary festivals. And the last one was in Berlin. And I came back 6 months later, lived for a year. It's in 2001, I think, or 2002. And then didn't come back until many, many years later. But for me, well, we were living in Hong Kong before Berlin, and before then I was in London and I was in Manchester, and I got this. The problem is always capitalism for writers, and for everybody. And I got tired of the conversations I was having continually, especially in London, but also in Manchester, and without question in Hong Kong. It was always about money and, you know, who has applied for this grant, who is getting this, and, you know, how many copies did you sell? People in London always ask you, how, non-writers usually, how many copies have you sold of your last book, which is a very, very disturbing and kind of rude question. And I got exhaustion from that, and just from having to make a living, you're constantly talking about work, and I do not like talking about work. I don't like talking about writing particularly.
I can attest to that.
I like that. To me, that's private, and the rest of the time I want to talk about other things, because that's how you get your. What do you mean? You can't. Well, okay, a lot of people do write about writing, but I don't want to write about writing. I want to be in the world. And Berlin, well, when I first came here, it was so cheap; it was virtually free. Now that's no longer the case, but compared to London and New York and so on, it's much, much cheaper. But what I find is people are very open-minded, and you can talk about ideas. And you can talk about pretty much anything, actually. You can talk about suicide at any time to anybody, and nobody bats an eyelid. It's open, and that's what I like, that you're not confined to the money conversation, you're not permanently stressed, so you can rest, your mind can be in a state of rest, it can be open, and your writing and ideas can come from there. So it gives me a space to talk to people in an open-minded way, have a lot of different conversations. I don't feel hemmed in by this sort of illusion of normality or by the money conversation. And as I was about to say, because my son just came in, it's a very good place to raise children, at least for now. And so that's why I'm here now. It's just a more relaxed financial position, so that you're not this continual sort of capitalist writer is a very, very difficult position to be in. And it's the position I felt that I was in when I was in London, constantly hustling for work, which my mind needs rest, and I can get that here.
Nice. For me, the question is really easy to answer.
Yeah.
I wanted to write, and Berlin seemed to be the best option for that, coming from Hanover. Like the biggest city, Berlin is the biggest city in Germany. I knew that there's a writer's scene here, and I didn't think about foreign countries, so I just thought, where can I go in Germany when I finished school? And then that was the first thing to do after actually finishing school, coming to Berlin. So that was really the reason, writing. And I came in 2004, I think, 3, so 22 years ago. And there is a vivid scene in Berlin. I curated and still curate a reading series in different theaters. I worked together with theaters here. I have a lot of writers, friends here, so that we can meet constantly and discuss our writing. So in that sense, it's a perfect place. Sometimes money is also part of the discussion, what I also dislike, I have to say, because I think it kills the inspiration. Everything becomes so profane when we talk about that part of writing. And there's a tendency in Berlin as well, I would say, to look for, okay, which grants are there, what shall we do? But there's also the poetic stream of discussions, and that I really like. So Berlin became then, I would say, it's a weird word, but home. When I wrote my first novel here in 2014, I was living here when I published it, I was living here already for 11 years. Yeah. And it's it's really a Berlin-focused novel. When I started writing it in 2010 or 11, I would say I was still doubting, well, am I in the position actually to write a novel which is also a novel about Berlin? It's not only set in Berlin, it is also a novel about Berlin.
Yeah.
But when I finished it, I felt like, yeah, I'm totally in a position for that. I'm here since a decade, and now I wrote this book. And then the second book was situated very naturally, even here. And it was an effort to not place the third book in Berlin. Well, it is partly in Hanover, where I originally come from, but it plays also in Mardin, where my father comes from, which is a very, very old city in the east of Turkey, in the Kurdish region. It's an Arabic city, 5,000 years old. And it seemed to be a nice connection to Hanover, which was completely destroyed after the Second World War and completely newly rebuilt. Whereas Mardin is really, you feel like traveling in time, because the houses are as they were 100 or 200 years ago. And I felt like these are two interesting concepts of memory in cities. Both about forgetting also. Maybe we'll talk about the issue of remembering and forgetting later as well. Both about forgetting and remembering, but in a very different way. The one conserved the old buildings, the other one is completely destroyed through war and rebuilt. So yeah, these are the main cities, I would say, and of course Istanbul and other cities as well. Even Berlin for 2 pages.
There's something else I want to say about Berlin, which is when I first came here, which is over 20 years ago, I felt it embodied the kind of spirit of the avant-garde, and the main thing about the place was visual art. Then I don't know if that's the case now. It was just very European and very white then, but everybody was making art and talking about art and doing some kind of lunatic art project in the house or on the street, or hey, my art project.
Absolutely.
I'm digging up the pavement illegally by night, like planting some kind of weird illegal plant. And, everybody was doing that, and everyone was very open about their own trauma, their own addictions. That it was this very, very open space, and I liked that a lot. And Hong Kong's the most closed space you can imagine, so it was a good place to come back to. But now it's become international, and it's lost some of the avant-garde feel because it's become gentrified and more expensive. Like Deniz is saying, all this capitalism is intruding, but it's become really international. Like there are spaces where there are cafes where it wouldn't occur to me to order my coffee in German. You just wouldn't do because they might not understand you. It's become really.
They might be offended.
They might be offended. And, so I guess that's maybe the price you pay for losing its rawness and cheapness, but you gain the cosmopolitanism.
I've spent a bit of time in New York in the last 5 years as well, and I sense strongly there that all of I call them weirdos in the most positive, beautiful sense, that the weirdos and the artists and just the people who want to do their own thing rather than follow the patterns they're being kind of herded into, they're sort of pushed out because it is so expensive, because it is so hard to walk around a really expensive city being a weirdo. And they're still here in Berlin, but they are fewer than they were when I first moved here, in 2012 as well. Yeah.
It's like you had London in the 60s, you had New York in the 80s, and then you had Berlin 10 years ago, and it's on a trajectory.
As you were talking, Vijay, I was thinking, they or we? Where are we in this?
Very hard to be the weirdest person in Berlin.
No, yeah, that's true. That's really true. But actually, Deniz, you already touched on it because you were talking about. So I wanted to ask as a question, what was the town or city that you grew up in, and why did you leave it? You've also talked about that a little bit, but I wanted to ask also, how does it feel to go back, if you do go back, and what happens to your identity, as perhaps as a writer, or just your identity as you are now when you're there?
Well, I go back regularly. I certainly was there more often when I was writing the last book. But my mother is still living there, so I have this familiar connection to Hanover, and I regularly go there. But, I really feel like after 22 years in Berlin, I really feel like this is where I'm living, and it doesn't feel like going back actually.
Okay.
It feels like going to visit my mom, and of course then you remember things, right? This was my school or something, but it's like the emotional attachment, I think, loosens. It gets less, weirdly. Like, it's not a nostalgic feeling to go to the hometown. It's like it's a city now, and I was born there, and I lived there, and that was an important. Youth is an important time, but it's somewhat not. I don't look there with nostalgia or something. I have to say, the question of identity. I have to say, coming to Berlin did something to my identity, I would say, because I found myself in a much more political environment than in somewhere in West Germany. I came in 2004 or 3, and in those years, 4, 5, 6, I would say till till 15 or something, there was this time where there were really something political was really happening in the city. Like the discussions on racism, on on how can we discuss racism in Germany, because I know that there have been a tradition of discussions elsewhere, but how can we discuss this in Germany? What are the right terms? How do we apply theories that we know from elsewhere to the German situation? And this really strongly happened in those years. That was crazy. And it was interesting to witness that. And that wasn't the case in Hanover. Then of course we had political discussions, but they were more like the old traditional left-wing anti-capitalist discussions.
Yeah.
And here suddenly it shifted, and that for sure did something to my thinking, and I wanted to contribute, and so that was important.
What was the town or city that you grew up in, and why did you leave it, and how does it feel to go back, and what happens to your identity when you're there now? Should I ask you, Vijay? Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting we're talking about sort of, leaving home and returning home, because I was born in Australia, but when I was 6, my family moved to England, to the UK. And then already when we moved back when I was 10, I already had this experience of sort of, inverted commas, returning home and experiencing that sort of uncanny sensation of something being both, familiar but also utterly foreign, which I think is how I would describe going back to the city of Sydney now in my adult life, because it does obviously, there are those things, as Deniz was saying, like that was my school, or I remember that smell of eucalypts after it's been raining or something, or the sound of those particular birds. But at the same time, very few of my family members are still there, and it hasn't been a place I've lived in quite a long time. So, yeah, I have a kind of an interesting relationship to that, I guess. And I felt quite at home in different places over the years in the UK and in Sydney, and I guess now in Berlin. So, yeah, I think that I'm not sure that I've ever quite had a sense of identity that is tied to a nation, tied to a country, tied to a place. I think it's always come from other things. And it's sort of quite hard to kind of map the contours of that or describe what it is. But that idea of kind of having one solid identity and having that being tied to place is something that I'm not sure I've ever had, actually.
Thanks. Question again to Rajeev about, I know the town or city that you grew up in, but the Wasafiri's audience don't. So why did you leave it, and how does it feel to go back, and what happened to your identity when you're there now?
Well, I left just because that's what you do, you leave. Especially if it's a small town, I wanted the world, I wanted something more interesting. And no, it's like Deniz says, it doesn't feel like going back, that's where I grew up. I think this notion of identity is constructed, it's a sort of sentimental delusion that we have, that we're attached to a culture or a place or a label. I think it's a time where people are very, very fond of creating identities for themselves. I think in the belief that it will make them feel more secure. And I don't really believe it does. I think it just works temporarily, and then something comes along to threaten that notion of identity, and then you feel less secure. But I've noticed that identity has become the number one defense against a world which offers very little security, but I don't think it's an effective one. I think it's a sort of sentimental construct. Right now, what I like is cosmopolitanism, internationalism. I like the fact that people in Berlin generally don't make that big a deal about their identity and where they're from. You just get on with talking, rather than sort of highlighting the obstruction to communication. So that's the kind of environment that I thrive in better. And I go back and see my parents and whatever, and that's where I grew up, and I'll think about that sometimes when I'm there. But that place has moved on as well. It's completely different to the place where I grew up anyway. Obviously, I know far fewer people there, so it doesn't have much relevance to my life anymore. But I think that's life. You move on. You outgrow places, and you are where you are. You only really inhabit now, and the rest is just in your mind.
But you have written about it. You wrote about it in The Dreamer, so it did.
A little bit. I mean, I think that was probably the point in my life when I believed more in that you had to look at your past and deconstruct the past and so on. And now I don't really believe that. I believe now that you have to look at the trauma rather than at what actually happened and how that impacts upon your present day reality.
That's interesting. Thanks everyone. I'm going to move on to a very writerly question about your writing day and how you organize it. Sorry to be geeky, but what's your process, and is there a dreamed of writing schedule? I'm going to ask Deniz first. Is there a dreamed of writing schedule that you're reaching towards, or are you there already? You're very successful, so perhaps you're there already, but I want to know then when, where, and how you write, if you're comfortable with sharing all of that, and also what your writing practice has taught you in terms of craft, but also in terms of life.
I feel like that every book changes the writing process. At least for me, that's the case. It's almost like for me, like, as if the novel is writing a novel or a book is something like a surgery, and then you have to regenerate yourself from the operation. And in that time, actually, nothing is as it was before. So for Gegen Morgen, Towards Morning, my second novel, I used to write from 6 in the morning till 11 every day, constantly. And now I'm again in a phase where one novel is finished, and I have to find my way back to actually to myself also. But the self I will find is different than the self before. And then in this period of transformation, really I feel the writing is different. For instance, after my father's sea, I really didn't want to work on the computer. I really couldn't bear looking at the screen, and it felt so wrong. So then, I started writing with my hands, with a pen. And this is really, so I can't really say there's one way or the other. It's shifting all the time, and it's different all the time. I think one constant thing is maybe the need for dialogue and exchange, not necessarily on the specific writing that I'm doing right now, but on writing in general, and then sometimes on the specific writing. But I keep my writing usually for myself for a long time. But I think this, like, being aware that you're not, a meteor in the universe all on your own, producing art, but actually in the middle of a lot of other people who are producing art or other things, and that this is all interdependent is important for me. So I really appreciate the dialogue as part of the writing process, I would say. And this happens regularly. I try really to, every couple of weeks or so, to get into such literary discussions.
Thank you. That's really, I think that's really valuable to Wasafiri's writing community to hear about how you write. It helps them to put themselves in dialogue with how they're working, whether it be fiction or academia or poetry or whatever they're doing. Thanks. How about you, Vijay?
I like that idea of dialogue a lot, but I often find it with books, actually, with reading. I'm a very slow reader, but some of the great moments I have when reading is when I'm I read a few sentences and already I have to put the book down and like make a note because I've had some idea for my own work. And that idea could be something could have been jogged in terms of, thematics or plot or something, but so often it's just you hear a sound or you hear a couple of syllables that kind of go together in a certain way, and even though you're not lifting them from one thing into another thing, they've jogged something in my own mind. So yeah, I mean, my writing process is, like many people's, I guess, often contingent on earning money by other means and by having to carve out time to write. I have spent most of my writing time in the past 12, 13 years since I moved to Berlin. I've been writing in the Staatsbibliothek on Potsdamer Straße, which I first saw as a teenager on the Wim Wenders film that maybe a lot of people know about who are interested in Berlin. Der Himmel über Berlin, Wings of Desire, which I actually just rewatched because I'm writing about it at the moment. But it was an incredible experience to go from a teenager in Sydney, Australia, seeing this amazing, enormous, cavernous library filled with this sort of rushing ambient sound of people's minds at work. And a few years later, to find myself actually going there day after day, writing. I wrote a children's book before I wrote my first novel, so that was really the first time where I really sat down and I knew what the project was that I was working on, and I sort of went to the library every day and wrote. And I've been doing that really for many years. And in a way, it's comforting that there's actually actually writing is a simple thing when viewed as an activity. You leave the house, you go somewhere where it's as quiet as it can be possibly, and you try to write sentences that you're not ashamed of, and then you go home and you're done. Like, it's not that hard to conceptualize, really. I mean, I'm now getting to the stage where I feel very much older than a lot of the people in the Stabi. A lot of undergrads who are like whispering and flirting.
I've seen them.
And I get annoyed. Yeah.
Libraries are very good places to flirt. I mean.
Yes, unfortunately.
As I remember.
And the better they get as places to flirt, the worse they get as places to work in silence, I find. But anyway, I just sort of, I like to write. I like to read something in the morning. That could be for a long time. It could be for a short time until I feel like my mind has in some way been activated. And then obviously also the writing process is different if I sort of have a specific project or a deadline, or I know exactly what I want to or have to write that day, as opposed to when I feel a bit more free and I can just write anything. I also have written quite a lot of short stories in the past decade, so that's again a different way of writing for me, which involves, I think, a lot more kind of freedom and a lot more focus on just the sounds of the words on the page and what they tell me about what should come next. So there are a few different ways I write, I guess, but at the end of the day, it's just going to a desk in a library or somewhere else and sitting down and typing. Yeah.
But speaking of Wim Wenders, you can see the angel through the window, can't you? The angel.
Yeah. That's my favorite desk. There's a very specific desk where you're looking right at it. Yeah. I like that one. Yeah.
Oh, lovely.
You also have a nice desk at home, and your wife and you have a desk in the same room, and hers is really pretty and really neat, and yours is just full of all kinds of crap.
It's true. I'm trying to sort it out. Yeah, my wife and I, we have a room.
Don't
in
say
which
about
we can
our
write.
house.
No, I won't return the favour that Rajeev has so generously dropped in my lap there. We have a room where we both can write. In actual fact, I find it quite hard to write there, just because I find it very hard to write at home, where there's always like a load of washing you could put on, or a floor that could be vacuumed, or some chore that could be done. So I like to get out of the house.
I think that's all part of the writing as well.
yeah. Putting on the laundry.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thinking while you do it, or not thinking.
Well, sometimes you have to do this for the next.
Yeah, that's
sentence.
true. That's true.
Also, you have to do it.
Well,
Well, it depends. Depends how grungy you want to be. But Rajeev, how about you? Of course, I know, but
How
How about you and your immaculate desk?
Yeah, I don't really have a desk. I don't really have any. Well, I have a toddler, is what I have.
Yeah.
So it's a different level. It's just a different level. I wrote the first draft of the new, if it can be called that, it's changed so much, and the tree over there actually by hand while he was asleep. But that was when he was a little baby. It was easier then. There was more time. Now I'm looking at him most days, all day. So I've been getting up at 5 in the morning to work, which is good. Between 5 and until he wakes up, 7:30, we can get a lot done. Maybe 8. If he wakes up at 8, that's even better. Can't always get up at 5. It makes me tired. I have to sleep in the middle of the day a little bit, and that's basically when I write. And 2 hours, you can get quite a lot done. I also really enjoyed writing by hand for a while, particularly because I wasn't writing fiction. It just somehow I wanted to do something a little bit differently. But it's just become, one day I worked on the tram. I had a 10-minute tram ride. I wrote then. I worked in the doctor's office, at Kita, but my son's kindergarten. I was just in the corner that, just whenever I have a few minutes, I'll just do some writing. It's with a toddler, everything is different. It's just you don't have the ability to choose any aspect of your life. It's all sort of you just do what you can. But I haven't found that it's made any real difference to productivity. It's just meant that I'm more focused. Oh, the other thing I'm doing is for this new book, I've started to do a lot of reels on Instagram and gained a lot of followers very quickly, and it's become a sort of thing. And that's a process of dialogue. You talk about dialogue, you both talk about dialogue, and then people respond to that, and then you get new ideas, and you think, I'll do a reel about this, and that's become a part of the book in a way. It's it's sort of the most public-facing end of a book in progress. That's been pretty interesting. A lot of it is just a lot of trolls and so on, but a lot of the comments kind of help to generate new ideas. But nonfiction is a different process. It's a different...
Are you talking through ideas as you talk to the camera, or...?
No, I'm just sort of making statements
Okay.
about things, but the ideas come in the background.
Yeah.
But nonfiction is less immersive than a novel, right? You don't live in another world exactly. You come into the real world and you go out of it, and it's easy. I find it a lot easier actually. It's you don't get so lost, and you don't need that, that kind of continual immersion. It's not as necessary. It's less emotional in a lot of ways. It's more intellectual. I would advise it to anyone who wants to rest.
Yeah, thank you all. I feel it's really important to talk about your writing schedule and day, because the viewers and readers from Wasafiri magazine, many of whom are writers, will be put in dialogue with themselves and how they work. And so I think it's really generative and helpful. So thank you. Okay. Let's move on before I do some kind of more one-to-one questions. So I just wanted to say where we are. Actually, we're seated all together by the Berlin Wall, behind the Chapel of Reconciliation on what used to be no man's land. And I'm wondering how you make sense of this place in relation to what's happening in the world right now. And I mean to say that we're in the middle of several genocides and wars. And I think, if we're talking about Germany now, with regards to Palestine, the German government's been unequivocally pro-Israel about it, and it makes it very easy for people to disassociate. So my question is a more general one to all of you, and it's, what do you feel is the role of the artist when governments fail us? Do you think that the artist takes on a specific role? should they, or how are you feeling about that? And that's a question because Wasafiri's audience is international, and we're constantly thinking about transnational solidarities and the role of art within them, and the role of the artist within community and society. So that's the question. The question here is, what do you feel is the role of the artist when governments fail us? And it's open to you, whoever wants to respond.
It might be a Russian saying or something that today's not too bad because it's worse than yesterday, but it's not as bad as tomorrow. Yeah, I think that it is important for me as an artist to keep in mind that art cannot save lives in a literal sense. It cannot change politics in an immediate sense. And I think that when you, as an artist, start to think in those terms, then I think that the art you make is not going to be very interesting anymore. Or at least I should say when I feel this for myself. I wouldn't speak for every artist by any means, but I think it's important to remember that writing, especially fiction, is not changing the world. The world has to be changed by other means, and I am no more an expert in that than anyone else who does any other kind of thing with their time. But I think that, I think that at the same time, there are political aspects to what I and probably what every artist writes. I mean, my first novel, The Passenger Seat, that's just there, it has a lot to say about, I think, the current moment that we're in. It has a lot to say about things like game playing that can be played, on a geopolitical level. It has a lot to say about what the masculinity of world leaders, of male world leaders, on their sense of their own masculinity is doing to global politics. But you have to read between the lines, as well. It's not there in black and white, because that would be a polemic, and that wouldn't have been interesting for me to write, and nor, I suspect, would it be that interesting for anyone to read.
I really think art changed the world, and fiction changes the world. I agree that it's probably not, or shouldn't be, or at least for me, be the intention of the work, of art, of fiction, of writing, to change the world. I think it's a change that happens unintentionally, but it happens. And maybe even more than anything else, I really believe more in art than in politics. But the question you're asking is also about the responsibility, the public responsibility of the artist or the writer. And I really think that this question has to be renewed, or new answers have to be found for this, because there have been answers, like in Germany in the '68 movement. There was a really clear answer to that question, and that was, of course, the writer has a moral and political mission. It's a moral and political voice, and the writer has the means to raise that voice, and it should. And if the writer doesn't raise his or her voice, then it's not enough in terms of responsibility, in terms of political responsibility. Yeah. That was like in the '68 movement, and internationally as well. Like if you look at Sartre saying, talking about existentialist responsibilities coming from Dostoevsky, who says everybody's responsible for everybody else all the time and full extent. That's like these are very these are really extreme requests to a writer, and to the responsibility of a writer. at least in Germany, I feel in the 90s, late 90s, and really till 2010 or something, being political as a writer was considered as something really bad and non-literary, and if at all second best for the art. And at that time, I was arguing, and friends were arguing all the time that, of course, art can be political.
Yeah.
But it was always, on my part, it was always meant in a way that you are, again, not a meteor. You are in a society. You are with other people. You witness things, and of course, it would be nice to be conscious of this by writing, which doesn't mean that you shouldn't write love stories in times of war. There I really agree with Rajeev. It's just a thing of consciousness about yourself, your time, your position, and so on. But what about the other type of responsibility, like outside of the art, as an artist? What is with that? I don't have an answer to that.
Yeah.
I'm really not sure, and I think it's really a specific time where things are transmitted through social media. You're getting a witness where you weren't a witness in other times, and then it seems to be an adequate reaction then also to react through social media.
Yes.
I'm not doubting this. It can be an adequate reaction, but is it the only reaction? What other forms of reaction are there? Do they have to be a reaction? Do I, as a writer, have to leave my work as a novelist for a moment behind and then say, now I'm talking explicitly about this and that? I really don't have answers to that question.
That's kind of what I did, really. I at the beginning of the year, I took to social media because I watched Trump's inauguration. I thought, right, I can't take this anymore. I want to do something, and so I started making these reels, and then I started addressing fascism in India, and then I moved on to Gaza and addressed some issues of racism in Britain, and it felt good, because when you're writing fiction, sometimes you do feel, you spend 3 years working on a novel,
exactly.
So, you feel very detached, and you think, what the hell am I doing? And then there's this new thing, social media, which didn't exist when I started writing, right? So suddenly I was able to actually do something directly. What impact that has, I have no idea. And I think also probably stopping writing fiction for a little while and writing non-fiction is again a response to the extremity of what's happening around us. But I think that's just me. I mean, I don't think there's a directive that we all have to do that. I think I just suddenly felt it's time for me to do this, and I feel I'm in the right position to do this, and I don't know how I'm actually going to go back to writing fiction now. I will, but it feels a bit weird. It feels like sort of gently closing the door and going back into my cozy room with my teddy bear and and then doing what I really love. But again, I don't want to force myself to stay out of the door. It's
well,
okay.
Does someone have the right to create fiction when the world is as it is another really important and incredibly impossible to answer question. But I think that, I also think that the metaphor is such a key sort of tool that the writer has. It's maybe the key. Maybe the sentence and the metaphor are the two key tools that a writer has. And I think that metaphor is exactly why you should write love stories in times of war, and why those love stories are actually political in times of war, But I also believe that it's not the artist's role to then explain that metaphor, to decode that metaphor on the other end, which I think is done, by the person who's reading or who's looking or who's listening.
And we need we need everything, right? We need children's stories. We need stories about squirrels. We need to keep people smiling as well. It's always been something we do. It's part of being human. We need good food.
Hope and joy are about resistance, and we can offer those.
It's about living, right? It's not just resistance. Not everything is resistance. It's also just we're still living, but it's also partly that here we are living our bourgeois lives in Berlin, and that feeling is ticking away all the time.
Mm-hmm.
There are people who are starving to death as we speak, and my son has enough food, and he has his education, and he's doing okay, and I'm doing okay, and I think everybody in the world is probably feeling that on some level. And how do you negotiate that?
Yeah, but the question is, as a public figure, what is the additional responsibility there? You said when governments fail, and you totally agree, said, well, it's their nature to fail.
Yes.
Mm.
Is there a particular onus
artists.
put on writers now, or artists in general? Does society put something on them that they must take up? But I think we've had a really long discussion about this, and I think it's very rich. So I'm going to leave it there, actually, for the viewers to continue to think about themselves. Vijay, you're a fiction writer, but you're also a writer and translator from German to English. And as a writer working between and in two languages, and as a writer who's been living with cross-cultural experiences throughout his life, I think, from speaking to you, I want to ask you about the hierarchies within language and the dominance of European languages in the publishing industry. What needs to change from your perspective, and where do you find hope?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I can only answer that question as someone whose language pair, as they call it, is German into English. So those are two very European languages. English specifically is obviously the kind of culturally dominant language. I think I see a lot of signs for hope in the books that I see coming out, in really interesting publishers, really daring smaller publishers who are not as conservative as a lot of the big publishers, where even if a book is fantastic, it has to go to a sales meeting and it has to have a sales team say, well, this is what kind of book this is. These are the 3 books that we think it's like. This is who we imagine the reader who will buy this book is, what their demographics are like, and this is how many copies it will sell, and this is how much money it will make.
Yeah.
Like, that's basically what happens with most for-profit publishers. But what gives me hope is the smaller presses who believe that stories should be interesting literature should be read, that stories should be told. The book I'm translating now, Senturan Varataraja's book, Rot Hunger, is going to come out through Tilted Axis Press, which is, I think, a very, very good example of a really great independent press who does its best with limited resources and is just committed to sort of finding interesting literature that is quite challenging. I mean, this is a challenging book. It's quite poetic. The language is difficult. The things it's quite philosophical. And I think I'm just really happy that there are publishers out there who like really difficult stories. Obviously, this book is written in German, but Tilted Axis obviously also publishes into English from a lot of other languages.
Yeah.
I have an author friend who's Tamil, and he's translating something from Tamil into English. So yeah, I think there are small pockets of hope, but there is still a lot of Rajeev was talking about the impact of capitalism on writers, and of course, money will always take the easiest and the safest route, and of course that means that risk taking is not happening that much in publishing. And then when someone does take a risk and it is successful, everyone kind of jumps on it. So yeah, I mean, I think that and I think that I could answer this question personally as well. That I could and should do a lot more in terms of seeking out more interesting writers that have been translated into English. Seeking out different presses, like buying more books from Seagull and from Tilted Axis and from Prototype in the UK and places like this. So there's a lot of cool stuff out there. I think we all just need to read more of it and translate more of it.
Yeah, and it's an active thing, isn't it? Because what's pushed towards us is not necessarily these titles or these books that can hugely expand our vision of what the world is, and bring great joy. But thank you so much for a lovely answer. And now, because I'm talking about translation, and Deniz, you're talking to a group of English language writers, and so I'm wondering how you have felt included or excluded in English language literature in the past, and what do you believe is the position of German literature in the world today, and in relation to the dominance of English? It's a big question, but maybe you are in dialogue with that, perhaps with German language writers, or...
Well, I mean, English literature or English language literature is, of course, has been very important for me, and for most of the German-speaking writers. So, like, I don't know, for sure, among others, not only English-speaking writers, but among others, for sure. For instance, James Baldwin has for sure shaped my thought, right? But also contemporary writers that I follow, English-speaking writers that I really like. I don't know, I just read Sarah Bernstein's Study for Obedience, and I really enjoyed that. So I think it's the English-speaking world delivers a very rich literature, which is great, and it's beautiful to have access to that. I have to say most of it is translated, so you wouldn't even need to be an English speaker to understand English to read books that were written in English, which is bizarre because most of the people do speak English. So I would also appreciate more literature to be translated from other languages into German, but most of them are translated from English, and most of the other languages are translated into German if they were translated into English, which is also a bizarre thing because it's a strange filter, you know, and only 3% of German-speaking writers are translated into English.
What's the percentage again?
3, only 3, and that's a pity for the English-speaking people, I would say.
We're missing out on a party.
Yeah, you are really, and this is for sure true also for other countries. So I think there's a disbalance, you know. But like for your question, do I feel confident? I mean, I'm partly shaped by it, so I do feel comfortable with it.
Yeah.
And
perhaps the question is, how comfortable do we feel?
How comfortable do you feel?
I think that's the real question. I feel very uncomfortable, really, and hot. But thank you. I'm really interested in cross-disciplinary collaborations, but also the way artists from different disciplines help each other to grow in terms of their craft. Like, for example, we have filmmakers here who are artists, and they're watching this conversation, and I'm sure it feeds into how they're working in some way. So can you tell me, this is a question for Deniz and Rajeev, perhaps in conversation, can you tell me about artists from other disciplines who have informed your writing practice, and why?
Well, in terms of narrative, it's cinema and TV which inform my writing the most, especially because I had a project in development for TV, so I've been trying to figure out how TV works and what is the structure of TV, which is much more formulaic than novel writing. I found that very, very interesting, and that suddenly I started watching TV shows and realizing that there are all these tricks being played in this that we didn't know, and that most people are consuming narrative in the form of TV. Not even cinema. Cinema's like become like a vinyl record or something. It's all TV now. And so it's just interesting to know and to understand how that works. But I found that there have been periods, I think when I was getting very little sleep, when Rumi was, when our son was very, very small, that most of my narrative was consumed by watching like half an hour of TV at the end of the day. And it's compared to literature, it is without question primitive. And it does not have that same kind of a depth. I quite like it, but if you subsist only on that, I think we're really, really missing something. But unfortunately, that does seem to be what's happening. It's really taking over. And I think novelists occasionally just need to keep an eye on it and understand the mechanisms they use, because that is most people's introduction to narrative. It's when they read, they're a part of their mindset is looking at it as if it's a TV show, and at a point where this hasn't happened really before, with this with series where you have 6 seasons and 40-minute episodes or one. This is new, and it's a sort of radical transformation in the way we approach narrative.
For me, music is important as also as a dialogue. I mean, just as you said, the main dialogue is with literature. So it's really reading and writing, and it may be poetry and prose, other forms of writing than the one that I am doing right now. But it's mainly writing. But then, if you think interdisciplinary, music is really important. This can be, some contemporary, independent English musician, or it can, like UK musician. There's a really good scene there. Or it can be classical music. I find myself coming really again and again back to Beethoven. But it can also be some, crazy free jazz, like Aki Takase, a Japanese jazz pianist in Berlin, who's usually, or not usually, but often entertaining together with Yoko Tawada.
Mm-hmm.
This is how I first met her. So really, music does play a role, and it's sometimes also then you can sometimes also find it then in the books, like it becomes part of the narrative.
The musicality of the narrative, or in terms of the characters are
I really
informed.
meant now in terms of the characters' choice of music.
Okay.
I'm in trouble then. I only listen to Disney songs. I've only got Moana and the Lion King.
We're both in trouble.
but sometimes it's also it's true. It's also the musicality. There's like, for instance, one story that I've written, about 50 pages, which really uses the rhythm of one song that I've been listening on repeat, and it really transposes this rhythm into the language. So it's both, I think. And
Not for the cameras.
oh, maybe, yeah, why not? It's Blind by Hercules and Love Affair.
Okay.
And then, of course, pictures also can have a strong effect on, be it photos or be it drawings. And sometimes even I work with artists together, like there's nothing published yet, but Patricia Bach, a Berlin-based painter, I wrote sentences and she made a drawing, and then I took the drawing and wrote a sentence.
Oh, how beautiful.
So, yeah.
Completely collaborative approach then. Thank you so much for answering that question. And I want to wind up now because the sun is going to start bearing down upon us again. But the final thing I want to ask is to bring us back to Berlin's writing community, where we began. And I wanted to ask, what do you think makes it different from other writing communities you've been part of? Also with regards to funding and support. I don't mean to bring capitalism into it, but it seems to be how we exist. Is there something unique that Berlin provides? And I'm asking what structurally allows writers to express themselves creatively in the city.
I think space is a big thing, and when there are pressures put on space, I think it's a lot harder for writers. I think I've seen this, I was talking about libraries before, but I think I've seen this I've worked in libraries in New York and in Sydney and in London and in Berlin. I'm talking about public libraries, and you can see that when pressures are put on space, when maybe people might have lived in like a share flat that had one spare room now it doesn't have a spare room anymore, or when someone might have lived on their own in a one-room apartment and now they can't anymore, or when someone might have had a spare room to write in and now they don't anymore. So you see those pressures on space, and I think that Berlin does still have quite good space in terms of public space, in terms of libraries, and also some great kind of artistic communities, like community-run spaces, like L'Etretage just down the road is the one that I can think of off the top of my head. And it's got quite interesting English language bookstores. I also think that from what writer friends have told me, the sense I get, and I guess Deniz or maybe both of you would know this better than me, but I do think that Berlin does have quite a robust structure of support for artists. I know there have been a lot of cuts lately, but my sense is that it's still actually a lot better than a lot of the other cities I've lived in the past. So yeah, and I mean, one thing I did recently was I was kind of sitting on a panel for a non-profit organization that controls creative spaces, and they lease them out to artists at like very affordable rates, and you write an application, you send it in, you say like, I really need a space for the next 2 years to work on this project, and there are those spaces available. I'm sure there aren't enough of them, but yeah, so those are things that I do find quite
Space.
positive here. Yeah.
How about the rest of you? You've spoken politically, that this was a political city when and it still is. I feel like Berlin lives and breathes politics. But also with regard to support for artists, do you think, you said community?
Yeah,
Are there other key characteristics?
There are residency programs, for instance, in Berlin.
Yeah, I was thinking of DAAD.
Yeah, this is like for non-Berlin writers, of course. I mean, I think all of the residency programs are for non-Berlin writers.
Yeah.
But still, they exist. At least 3 in Berlin. 3 that I now know immediately. If I would think about it, maybe there are more. And then you have this Arbeitsstipendium, so work grant for writers from the Berlin Senate.
Everyone applies. It's like a lottery if you win. Everyone applies.
And this is for German-speaking writers and also non-German-speaking writers in Berlin. And I think that's quite unique. You don't have that everywhere. And also there is a lot going on in the culture scene. Like I don't think that writers live only or should only live from a support system, but there's also a vivid cultural scene. So there are readings, festivals, moderations. So there's really a lot going on where writers can participate. I'm sure it's also exclusive in some parts. I mean, only, I don't know how many, 10 or what people get the grant, the working grant. Maybe not everybody can sneak in all the festivals and cultural activities, so it's a network thing as well.
Yes.
So I think there's also something really exclusive about it that we should be aware of, but the city still offers a lot, maybe more than any other city in Germany. Yeah.
Thank you for also highlighting the class dynamics or the kind of exclusionary nature of some of these offers that are here for Berlin artists, whilst also being wonderful. Do you have anything to add?
Well, it's a cosmopolitan city, so there's constant stimulation. I think that's what I like about a city. There's always you can always go to any number of openings, art exhibitions. There's lots and lots of good cinema. Cinemas show all kinds of stuff, not just contemporary films, and book readings and discussions, and it's sort of constant, and it's happening in a very cosmopolitan way. And to me, that's the advantage of a city, out of not living in a city. And that's the advantage. There are not that many truly cosmopolitan spaces in the world, and this has become one.
Yeah.
There are quite a lot of opportunities, and you know, we have a writers group now. We started one, and read each other's work, which I haven't really done before. I mean, again, to me, my process is perhaps more solitary about writing. I tend to keep that to myself, but what I like to do is just to talk about things and debates and issues, and you know, where people have, what other people's experiences and what they think about things. And I'm finding that just by having a lot of different conversations, it keeps my mind open and active, which is what I need to I don't want to get too stagnant or too caught in the same debates or the same conversations, you know.
Berlin offers that fluidity, intellectual fluidity. Thank you all. The sun has touched us all now. It's definitely on Deniz. So I think now is a beautiful time to close. But I want to say my deepest gratitude for all of you for turning up today. It's beautiful for me as a writer, but also for Wasafiri's international community to hear you think deeply about these issues and also about Berlin. I wanted to say that perhaps a really Berlin experience is that the filmmakers I'm working with, I found in my local cafe, two wonderful artists, Aaron and Grace. The tripod was borrowed from a local friend, a restaurateur who's also a musician in his past life. And the person babysitting my son while we're having this conversation is also a writer and artist. So I think this is a very typical Berlin experience, and that we all help each other to make beautiful things happen. So yeah, I'm deeply grateful. Thank you so much. It's my birthday tomorrow, so I'm going to really relax after this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, Wasafiri. Yahoo!
Cool. Well done.
That's a wrap.
I'll be German and not mention your birthday until it's your birthday.
Yeah. Which is
now cup the cake.